what a better occasion than this to talk about photographing the moon. So, since childhood, everybody, all of us, has been, in some way or the other, being fascinated with the moon. And when I personally got to know that doing lunar photography, doesn't require a lot of professional grade equipment and a lot of expensive equipment. It was really a happy moment for me. And like a lot of people, I started my astrophotography journey with lunar photography, and eventually it was via capturing a moon that I came to know about the term astrophotography. And then it all began. So of course, when we talk about lunar photography, we talk about photographing the moon. We imagine the moon in some way or the other. And for those who are into the photography side, the artistic rendition of the moon, they can portray the moon in a number of ways. And uh, I'm not sure if it's a myth that exists, but I've heard a lot of people talking about this, or being very surprised when they get to know that you can also see the moon in daytime. Um, uh, but again, I'm not sure if it's a common trend for everyone. But the moon is visible throughout the day. And of course, it varies upon its phases, at what phase it is in. But the photography of the moon can be done both at the daytime and at night. At daytime, at times, of course, it can be really hard to find the moon. For example, right now it is we're approaching full moon. So if you have looked at the sky, maybe around before the sunset, you must have come across a pretty large moon. But this has been going on. I mean, uh, as we reach full moon, the moon start vanishing from the daylight or daytime sky, and it is present whole through the night. Lunar photography, broadly speaking, can be of two types. Either you can photograph just focusing on the lunar disk, especially when you're photographing at night. The other features are not available. For example, if there are, very, uh, there are other stars in the moon, there are other objects in the sky, for example, clouds, etc. Those are not really visible when you're concentrating on the moon. And of course, you can also do it with landscape elements. And that is, of course, very essentially happens when the moon rises or the moon sets. One of the advantages of lunar photography as a part of astrophotography is that light pollution doesn't have a lot of effect. Of course, it has its own effect. Not only light pollution, but the atmospheric seeing, the visibility, etc. It, of course, has its own effect. But as beginners, these are almost negligible unless you are doing high resolution lunar photography. These are the things that you should be less concerned about. Uh, in comparison, in other genres of photography, light pollution is the biggest enemy, and moon itself is another large enemy of astrophotographers, especially during the full moon phase. Mm, So lunar photography, in that sense, is pretty much accessible for everybody, regardless of whether they are living in a metro city or in a rural area or in a dark sky area. Uh, just like any other subgenres of astrophotography, lunar photography has its own science. You can, study a lot of stuff, create scientific outputs from your images. And of course, since it's a part of photography, it has its own artistic rendition, depending on how you're willing to present the moon, how you as a photographer would like to represent the moon, or the portrayal of your own image. So again, it's a wonderful amalgamation of science and art. Talking about the equipment that is required, so lunar photography, since the part that I'll come to next is what types of lunar photography there are, and depending on what kind of lunar photography you're doing, There are various equipment that you can choose. Of course, you need to have a medium, an imaging medium that could be your phone or your DSLR. Um, I personally do not do it with phone. I do it with DSLR, and I choose either a telephoto lens or a wide lens, depending on what exactly I'm trying to capture about the moon. Um, when I'm doing, uh, especially with telephoto lenses, it is preferred that we do it with a sturdy tripod, because handheld becomes a bit difficult. And as we will see, that there are certain criterias that are to be met when we are doing lunar photography, where tripod is a necessity. Of course, you can do it through a telescope, which will give you a wonderful result. You can attach your DSLR or your phone via your with your telescope and do your photography. Star trackers or equatorial mount are not uh, uh, absolutely essential for lunar photography, but there are certain times. For example, when you are doing long exposures of the moon, especially during total eclipses, where you need to take um, exposures of about 10 seconds, 20 seconds, or when you're photographing the Earth-shine moon. So the part where you need to take longer exposures, you need to use a star tracker. But every star tracker, I guess, or at least the equatorial mount, they come with settings for lunar photography, because as you might be aware, that the speed of movement of the stars and the moon are different. Moon moves a bit, in that sense, a bit slower than the stars, because stars rotate in about 24 hours, while the moon takes around 25 hours. Uh, so there are different modes. If you have used an equatorial mount, you must have seen that there is an option for tracking the moon. Uh, for certain situations, you might also need an intervalometer, where you need to take, because as we will see later, that there are certain situations where you need to take multiple images of the moon to stack. So for those purposes, when you're taking multiple images of the moon, say for example 100, 200, or 300 images of the moon, an intervalometer might help you. Uh, Many of the modern cameras or phones, they do have inbuilt intervalometer. In that case, you do not need an external one. But in case your camera is lacking an internal intervalometer, you might want to invest on a external one. It's not really expensive, maybe 1,000 or 1,500 rupees, but it always comes out very handy. Talking about the types of lunar photography, so as I've said, that you can just focus on the lunar disk. Um, it can either be the full moon phase or the crescent moon phase. You can also combine it with moon landscape elements during moonrise and moonset. Wide field lunar photography is, is everything that is included, other than when you're focusing on the lunar disk. For example, the background image that you're seeing, I would consider it rather wide field lunar photography, where there are other elements of the sky or landscape, whatever is embedded into the image, and that acts uh, as a complementary element to your photograph. High resolution lunar photography depicts those images where you're doing lunar photography at extremely high resolution with the help of a telescope, where you're focusing not on the lunar disk but rather on individual craters. So you can think of it as extreme close-ups of the moon. Uh, just like the sun, moon comes with a lot of optical phenomenon. It produces a lot of optical phenomenon like lunar halo, iridescence cloud, lunar corona, moon bows, and all. So that is also an opportunity for everyone to do this kind of photography with the moon. And special events relates to occultations, conjunctions with the moon, um, sort of transits, either it's an ISS transit or CSS or Hubble, or eclipses that could be partial, total, or penumbral. And of course, you can also think about creative lunar photography that we will see in the coming years. So these are just an example of lunar disk photography where you are just concentrating on the moon. So if we talk about both the images, our concentration and also the subject that is depicted in the images are just the moon, and there are, it's all black on the outside, which is the sky. So both of these are full moons. This is the moon that we mostly see with our naked eyes, and this on the right hand side is a version that we call a mineral moon. So by mineral moon, what we mean that is the lunar surface is not black and white or gray as we see it with our naked eyes. Rather, it has a lot of subtle colors coming out of the minerals that are deposited on the lunar surface. So when we photograph the moon and we exaggerate the colors of those minerals, um, that is typically known as mineral moon. These colors are not made up. These are the colors that are really there. So this orange and reddish are the iron deposits. These bluish areas are where there is a titanium rich soil. But we do exaggerate. The colors are not really this strong in the lunar surface. But just via means of representation, we do exaggerate the colors. We can also do the lunar disk photography on the other phases, be it waxing or waning phases. So as you can see, these are two crescent moons. This is a really, really, crescent, I would say, maybe around 10% illuminated or less. And this, I would say, around 25% illuminated. And you can, continue through all the levels of illumination of the moon throughout its phases. Of course, you can also add the landscape elements. So on the left hand side, you can see that there is a tree, and on the background, we have a rising full moon. I hope this is a full moon. I don't exactly remember, but nonetheless, it's almost near, if not a full moon. And on the right hand side, you can see here the moon is really not the subject of the image, but I've chosen just to show you that how can you can also get creative with the moon. So this is a crow. Uh, it was during early morning, probably at nautical twilight or maybe civil twilight. And on the background, you can see a setting full moon. Um, so you can use moon as a prop to your creative images. Wide field lunar photography comes in different shapes and sizes. On the left hand side, you see this is rather mm, uh, a setting moon along with Pleiades, and this was taken with a 135 lens. So this is also to be considered wide field. And on the right hand side, this is an extreme wide field. I guess this was taken with a maybe a 16 or 15 focal length. And you can see there is the moon. This is a trail of the moon because it was taken over a longer period where images were combined, and you can also see there's some lightning going on and some planes taking off. I live near the airport, so this is a very common sight for me. And you can also see a lot of cloud trails and star trails along with it. This is not really a star, I guess. This was maybe Venus or Jupiter. I don't exactly remember, but I hope you get the idea that you can use the moon uh, uh, in many different ways, in many different focal lengths. Talking about the optical phenomenon, of course, you can see lunar halos. So on the left hand side, this is not the regular 22-degree halo. Rather, this is a combination of different odd radius halos. Maybe this was 17 degrees. There were actually three halos. I don't exactly remember, but 17, 21, and maybe 23. But you can also see the more regularized 22-degree halo. And there are also two planets. I think these are Mars and Venus. No, not Venus, Mars and Jupiter are there. And on the right hand side, you can see that there is a good amount of iridescence along with corona. Uh, So these are some of the, but do remember that unlike sun or in daytime, the intensity of those optical phenomenon like solar halo or corona or iridescent cloud at night with the moon, since moon is not of course as bright as the sun, the intensity is very low, so you have to have a very keen eye in order to get to know or what is actually going on, and then you can actually do photographs. For example, if I just give you an example of what is going on the left hand side, this was actually not very much visible through the naked eyes. I was just trying to, take a wide field image of the moon along with these two planets that you're seeing. But on the output, since our cameras are capable of seeing, taking longer exposures and seeing what our eyes can't see, I actually came to see these halos. The 22-degree halo on the other side is pretty much, I would say, has better visibility than the odd radius halos. Coronas are pretty much visible with naked eye. Iridescence may not always be. At times they're very subtle and can only be captured with long exposures. But if it's a bright iridescence, then you can of course see with your naked eyes. Talking about special events, you can of course capture different occultations where certain objects goes behind the moon and then reappears. So an occultation has two parts. One is the disappearance, the moment when an object that goes from, of course, from our perspective, goes behind the moon, and then there is reappearance when it reappears from behind the moon. I think on 24th midnight, 24th, 25th, there is an occultation of Saturn, and it is visible from certain parts of India. So you might want to check your location on different planetarium apps to see if it's visible from your location, and if the weather allows, I would encourage everybody to do some sort of photography, or just if you don't want to do photography, just enjoy it with your naked eyes. And both the disappearance and reappearance would be visible, so I would recommend everybody. So on the left hand side, this is the Venus at the time of its disappearance, and on the right hand side, this is a bright star on Taurus, which was it's a more sequence of, I think, probably around 30 minutes or an hour, maybe, probably an hour, where you can, see it's gradually going towards the moon and eventually behind the moon. The reappearance in this case was not visible. I'm sorry, this is actually a reappearance and not a disappearance. The disappearance was probably not visible. This is a disappearance, and the reappearance in this case was not visible because then it would have become daytime. The sun would have risen, so it was not visible. Other types of special events include conjunctions or near conjunctions. Excuse me. And these are two examples of Moon and Venus are in near conjunctions. These were taken, I think, 2 or 3 months apart in 2023. This is almost very common. It's not very rare, at least a near conjunction. So you can keep checking, and it normally happens during the new moon. Either if Venus is on the western side, if it's visible after sunset, then it would be after the new moon. This kind of near conjunctions. And if Venus is on the eastern side and visible before sunrise, then this sort of near conjunctions with moon would be visible before 2 or 3 days before the new moon. So, of course, take help of your planetarium apps for this. Uh, Eclipses, we all love eclipses. So on the left hand side, this is a partial lunar eclipse, and on the right hand side, this is a sequence of a penumbral eclipse. Both of them are extremely well visible with your naked eyes, but why not take it a step further and do a bit of imaging of this phenomenon? Like I said, moon in daylight is it's a surreal feeling that you get this certain glow, what we call the golden hour glow, or the twilight glow on the moon. Both of these are HDR composites. You really do not see it like this. You only see the bright part, but these are HDR composites. Earth-shine moon is another very interesting thing to photograph, but at the same time, this is probably the only thing that is slightly affected by light pollution, but still living under a bottle line sky, being able to capture these images. I would say that it should not be a bar in photographing the Earth-shine moon. Earth-shine moon is also visible with your naked eyes. It is visible uh, 3 4 days before and after the new moon, either on the eastern sky or on the western sky, depending on when you're looking at it. And this is one type of lunar photography that requires longer exposures because this part is really dim. So you might want to take longer exposures, and this is one occasion when you would want to use your star tracker, because, for example, for this, I did not use a star tracker. For this one, I used a star tracker. And as you can see, if you're tracking the moon, the stars will be trailing. Um, so this is another very interesting part of the moon. Uh, you can, of course, get a lot creative with lunar photography. It's completely up to your imagination how you represent the thing. So, for example, for the image on the left, I collaborated with a wonderful astrophotographer, Lucy Yu. She's from Australia, and we were trying to look at the difference in moonrise in different hemispheres. So, as you might be aware, that the direction of moonrise in northern hemisphere and southern hemisphere are different. The way the moon rises and the moon sets, also the orientation of the moon. So we were really trying to look at that and create a composite. So the bottom part was taken from, I think, Brisbane, and this part was taken from Jharkhand, from northern hemisphere. And you can see that these are two different orientation where the moon rises. So in northern hemisphere, the moon rises slightly bent towards south. So it's this direction would be east south or southeast direction, and on the southern hemisphere it would be just the different. It would be northeastern direction, and it of course reverses at the time of moon set. On the right hand side, this is a sequence of the moon throughout the twilight. So this was captured during daylight. This was during civil twilight, nautical twilight, astronomical twilight, and night. I'm not going to go into the details of these different types of twilight. You can, of course, have your own readings. But one thing that was interesting in this photograph is that you can see how slowly the earth shine part is getting revealed, and it gets more prominent as darkness falls. So this is a very interesting part, and this was actually what I was trying to capture. And another thing is the changing color of the background. I did not do any kind of changes in the background color. This was what came out of the camera, and the white balance was kept constant throughout the sequence. You can also think of different projects about lunar photography. For example, this is a composite of all the full moons from 2022. So there are probably 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. Yeah, 12 full moons. If there is a blue moon, you will get 13 full moons a year. So you can, and how you organize the moons is completely up to you and your imagination. On the right hand side, these are the 4 super moons that appeared on 2023. These I would say long term because it spans over almost a year. And on the next slide, you will see these are rather short term projects. So, for example, this is a size comparison between a moon in perigee and apogee. Perigee is where the moon is nearest to Earth, and apogee is where it is furthest from Earth. And there is a good amount of difference. The difference is may not be apparent with your naked eyes, but when you do it with a longer telephoto lens or a telescope and then place both the moons side by side, the size difference is pretty apparent. This is also a short term. This is not really a project in the sense of a project. This is actually representation of the same image but processed differently. So this is a version on the left is what we see the moon with our naked eyes. It's pretty much gray. This is what we see the moon through modern DSLR or mirrorless cameras. They capture the minor colors of the moon. And on the right hand side is what we call the mineral moon. What we astrophotographers, excuse me, once exaggerate the colors of the moon is what we get to see. And of course, you can photograph transits. These are always interesting. So on the left-hand side, you see an aeroplane transiting the moon. This cannot be planned. This is completely onto your luck. You have to wait and wait and wait until you get your opportunity. On the right-hand side, you see this white dots. This is actually the International Space Station, which is transiting through the Earth-shine part of the moon. And this can be planned well ahead. There is a website called ISS.transitfinder.com. You can just type in Google ISS Transit Finder, then the first result would be it. And it would also take up your location automatically, and it will show what uh, date, if there is a transit from visible from your location or surrounding area, the exact time, the date, and everything. And it shows transit of three things: the ISS or the International Space Station, Tiangong or the Chinese Space Station, and Hubble. Hubble and Tiangong, they are a bit, I would say, difficult since they're very small, and unless you have a large telephoto lens or a telescope, it is somewhat more challenging. So ISS in that comparison is easier since ISS is already visible with naked eyes, at least as a bright dot. So you can plan accordingly. And of course, this is what I talk about, the creativity. So here, it's a black cumulonimbus, and you see a crescent moon, and this is a lot of cirrus clouds, and probably 95 or 90% illuminated moon. I think this was captured just before the day, and you can see both the cloud and the moon is glowing with the golden hour glow. And this was of course taken at the time of sunset, and this was right after sunset, if I remember correctly. So any type of astrophotography that you're doing consists of three parts: planning, imaging, and processing. Uh, since today is not, we do not have a lot of time to discuss in details, so I've just mentioned a few points that you should remember while doing these three things. So for planning, you check your planetarium apps like Skyview, Mobile Observatory, Stellarium. There are also different websites like Time and Date, etc., where you can check about the lunar phase, when it rises from at your location and when it sets, and plan your photography accordingly. And if you're planning for a project, be it a short term project or a long term project, you have to plan well ahead. You have to, think a lot. A lot of things should be there already present when you are actually going ahead executing your plans. So you have to, at least I would say, give yourself a month to study well about the nature or the behavior of the moon and the sky. Of course, that would keep varying depending on the type of project that you're doing, but you should be well prepared for that. If you want to take pictures of the rising or the setting moon with some monuments or some other natural structures, there are two apps, Photopills and Planet Pro. Some of you might already be aware of these two apps. These are extremely helpful, and these are probably the only two apps that you can use. So for example, I live in Kolkata and I would like to photograph, uh, forget about Kolkata. If you're in Delhi and you want to photograph the moon rising just behind the India Gate, where you should be positioned, what would be your focal length, and all those, when you should start doing that, everything you will get through these apps. Both the apps are paid, but it's not a huge amount. So, if you're really interested in those kind of photography, you can go ahead. And of course, ISS transits or CSS or Hubble. Plane transits cannot be planned, as I mentioned. But this kind of transit, you can keep checking your um, that website, isstransitfinder.com, and you can plan ahead of it. During imaging, if you're using a telephoto lens, it is most recommended that you use a, sorry, was that you use a tripod so that there is no motion blur, doing it handheld. For images of the lunar disk, be it full moon or crescent moon, stacking multiple images will of course help you get better details, rather noise-free image. So you might want to take 100, 200, 300. I would say start with 50 or 100, and then you compare it yourself. It completely depends on your um, camera and lens, that what would be the best result for you. So you take 300 images on your first time, and then take multiple stacking. First stack 50, then stack 100, then stack 200, and then stack 300 or 400, and then compare them side by side and check which one you like. And if there is really, you're looking at some sort of benefit by taking 300 or 400 images, or there is almost no visible difference between a stack of 100 and 300 images, and then you take your decisions accordingly for the later uh, photography sections. Um, as I've mentioned right at the beginning, if you're taking multiple shots and your camera doesn't, you have to use an intervalometer so that you don't have to touch your camera all the time and press the shutter button. If you're having an internal intervalometer, I think all the Nikon cameras and Sony cameras do have internal intervalometer. The modern Canon cameras do also have it, but if you do not have a camera that has an internal one, you can invest on an external one. If you're using a DSLR, you keep an interval between each shot, because as you might be aware, the DSLRs work with a mirror in front of the sensor. So every time you take a photo, the mirror opens and then closes. So this opening and closing causes a bit of micro vibration, and you do not want that. So it is better to keep at least 1 or 2 seconds of interval, so that the vibration settles down and you get a better image. And another thing, at the same time, you also would like to keep a higher shutter speed. Unless you're using a tracker, your shutter speed should be relatively high. uh, there is a calculation, I don't know how good it works, but people say that your shutter speed should be double your focal length. So for example, if you're using a 600 lens, your shutter speed minimum should be around uh, 1 by 12 hundredths of a second. If you're using a 200 lens, your shutter speed should minimum be 1 by 400 seconds. But if you are using a tripod, I don't think this really matters, but still you don't want to take a very short, long exposure like 1 by 50 or 1 by 30. I think the minimum should be around 1 by 200. Of course, it depends on the illumination of the moon. You also do not want to increase your ISO so high that you get a lot of noise. So there should be a balance. You keep checking, just take a picture, zoom 100% in your camera, check if there is any sort of motion blur that you're looking at. If not, go ahead. If you've seen uh, at least small amount of motion blur, just increase your shutter speed. During processing, I don't know how handy this would come, but for pre-processing, I think it's better to create a folder with a date. So for example, you're imaging the moon today, so you create a folder named Moon 20th July 2024, and then you keep all the moons. So this helps in the later part. So after 1 year, if you want to get back to that data, I don't know why you would like to get back, but in any case, in case you want to go back, it's better to have a documentation, because you don't want to have a lot of image files across your a single folder. So it's better to have different folders for different dates and also different occasions if you're uh, photographing them on a single day. Uh, so Peep is a software that helps to crop and center your lunar photos. So this is a very handy. Of course, today we do not have the opportunity to do a processing session. For stacking, Auto Stacker 3, nowadays we have Auto Stacker 4, Registacks, Astrosurface are the different options that you have. I personally like Auto Stacker 3 the best, even over Auto Stacker 4. So I would definitely recommend that. Final processing, you can do it in Photoshop, or if you're using other um, uh, processing softwares like GIMP or Lunar AI or whatever is there uh, in photography market, whatever you're comfortable with, you can go ahead. This is a tendency. I've intentionally mentioned this. There is a tendency for, at least not only for beginners, but a lot of photographers, even with photographers, that they over sharpen the moon. That really doesn't look good. There should be, moon is not that sharp. It should not be, poking at your eyes. So it should be, a pleasing image. So do not go overboard with sharpening and also processing. Extreme colors. When you're doing any kind of photography, astrophotography is not an excluding thing or a very special part in photography. So your image should represent, it should soothe your eye. So, not going overboard with anything, be it colors, sharpening, or anything. It should be minimal, as I say. It should be minimalistic so that the natural beauty of the moon or the sky comes out of it. And of course, in order to get a lot of inspiration and ideas, you can check out the following spaces like APODs, Astronomy Picture of the Day. A lot of institutions has it, like NASA, GRAG, Astronomia. There also used to be another uh, forum called LPOD, Lunar Photography or Lunar Photographs of the Day. It is it's not going on since 2015, but they do have a repository, so you can also check that out. You can also take a look at different magazines and their websites, like Astronomy, Sky and Telescope, BBC Sky at Night, among others. Websites like earthskyspace.com, they would, of course, help you with different ideas. And of course, they'll also keep you updated regarding any, excuse me, upcoming events related to Moon. Social media is, of course, where we all are. And if you would want to follow different lunar photographers or astrophotographers in general, you might want to be a part of different astrophotography groups where people share their amazing images. And you can get ideas about composition. You might want to talk to those people about what exactly they did, how they did it. And most of the astrophotographers are, they're happy when you ask them about their processes. Of course, they won't tell you all of them, but at least you will get an idea. So that's it from my side. Clear skies, everybody, and I hope that you go out, enjoy the beauty of the night sky, and maybe capture some moments with the moon. Thank you so much.